pleased to introduce you to Jaslyin Qiyu. She's worked from ground up, including being the first starter on the ground to building marketing teams from scratch. And she's also worked with C-level executives on their corporate and personal brand. Jaslyin, welcome.
Thank you, Rilla.
So, Jaslyn, the first thing I want to talk to you about is going back to the beginning and looking at the early days of your experience and your learning. Can you please share with us what was your path to get to the role that you've had today and the experience that you've had today?
I guess I've always had this internal struggle since young of like my left brain, right brain kind of mentality, where so much so that I like writing since young. So that kind of led me, because of my love for writing, the love for language, I actually started with a law diploma. But that requires a bit of more logic as well. So I thought that was a good balance. Because I didn't see myself as being overly creative. I always had this notion that people who are extremely creative, they are very flamboyant, they have like high level thinking and they're hid in their clouds or something, but that's just not me. So I decided to do that. But then I hated it. I hated it when I did my internship. I was like, oh no, I don't think I want to be stuck here in this cold law library, hid in my book and not really interacting with people. So then I decided, okay, sorry, I told my parents, I failed you. I'm not going to be a lawyer after all. So I took a bit of a gap year and focus on just writing. And then I decided that I should maybe try my hand to be a copywriter. Yeah, the other side of it is you write for the interesting stuff, which to me, advertising, writing is a bit more interesting. So then my first job is actually at an advertising agency. I was their only copywriter. I guess I'm lucky that they took me in because I was just harassing them constantly. Yeah, but then that was not enough because as I started working on the client briefs, I worked with the designer, the account director, and I started to question a bit more as to the deeper level thinking behind all this copy and content they wanted. So then I decided to take a bit of a break. I furthered my studies, to major in both communications as well as marketing. And then I actually joined the government agency. It's one of my first roles on the ground and being exposed to a wide spectrum of marketing. I think that's a very good way to learn. And I actually do encourage people who just start out, maybe don't start choosing your niche until you have explored all avenues of different aspects of your industry. And for my case, it's marketing. Because marketing is so broad. It's like the cloud, there is traditional, above the line, below the line, events, so on and so forth. So I'm glad I was open. I had a very open mindset to get my hands dirty across all different channels and types of marketing before I decided where I was a bit more interested in, where I'm a bit lacking in, and then just continue to learn along the way. And I guess here I am today.
That's so brilliant, especially for anyone, who's listening who may be thinking that they're on a path that isn't quite right, but you set a certain path, like, you had with law, you committed to your family, this is what I'm doing, but then you changed and took the skills and what you learned, your true passion of writing and moved into marketing career. And all marketers out there are very pleased that you've come to this industry. But I think it's a great example of that's so normal. It happens, right? And you've been able to thrive in the marketing space, even though that wasn't the early beginning part of it. So interesting. Jen, so how about in marketing? It's the industry is constantly evolving. We've got from automation to AI and so much more that's happening. What are your strategies to stay on top of industry trends and to continuously learn what's going on?
So I think it's important to look at your organization, whether they do enable you or even empower you with continuous learning and exposure to different aspects of marketing, be it across the department or even so-called non-marketing functions, whether you can move to a different function, but that will still be relevant to marketing because you will still be required to work closely Because if you realize the trends nowadays, like as a CMO, they actually need to know more than just marketing and comms. They need to know about customer experience. They need to know, of course, all the technology. Now there's a bit of gray area, power struggle between MarTech as well as traditional tech teams. And then now with Gen AI, you need to know even more. So I would think it's good to look at what is available within the organization that you can move across to also try out, to learn more experience. But if it doesn't, then I think it's good to look outside of the organization to learn, stay abreast in terms of, like, for example, Joe's good quality content, industry seminars. You can make sure that you are attending at least one, like every year or every 1 or 2 years, where the trends are picking up, and making an effort to pick up courses on your own. I think it does, because like you're up there or something doesn't mean you know everything, right? So I think that's one of the mistakes that I've observed. Maybe the more senior you go, the more you feel a bit more embarrassed if you're seen learning. But I don't think there's anything to be embarrassed about. I think we should be students for life, basically.
Couldn't agree more. That's such a good point. And I'm glad you raised customer experience because I wanted to ask you about your experience in this area. So often when we think about customer experience, as we think about it as the responsibility of the product team, or often there's might be a customer experience team, like a dedicated team for that. How can marketing play a role in customer experience?
Actually, I would back to differ along this thinking. I think customer experience is everybody's responsibility. Just as I recently put out a piece as well on how brand management is everybody's responsibility and not just the marketing department's responsibility. Because ultimately, whatever the purpose of why an organization exists is to serve your customers. It's not to serve yourself or your CEO for that matter. The Basically, you're here to solve a problem of address a fundamental need that the customer has, and that's why you are created this company, and that's why you have a workforce to actually come up with solutions to fix that problem. So I think having a customer mindset first and foremost is very important. Of course, secondly, of course, having that people centric mindset is equally important. So then, because marketing is front and center in terms of working on the communication strategy as well as the customer engagement strategy. So we need to know, we need to be curious about the customer psychology, how they think, how they act, why they act a certain way and why they think a certain way, how they are affected by all the changes around them, and then what does that mean for the messages that you're putting out there, what that means for the solutions that you're trying to come up to address those concerns and issues. So really it is everybody's responsibility. And that's why as well, like in the course of my career, I'm glad that I didn't stick strictly to just the marketing part, but I jumped at the opportunity, especially like back when I was in OCBC. They were actually the first team to come up with a customer experience function. And then it was really left field for me, right? Because I've not had this exposure. But then I'm thankful that at least the founders of that department, they had the vision to get people who are not typically from, say, a bank, because then they would think like bankers, and then they are actually not the most customer centric people. Because after you have been in there for so long, you just cannot think, empathetically for the customer anymore. So that he wants a people outside, and that's how we all scrambled together like a team of, I guess, cowboys trying to think on behalf of the customer. And I learned a lot, even though it's a short stint of 1.5 years, but I learned a lot. And that experience actually helped me to be a better marketeer subsequently when I move on to different organizations.
Oh, that's great. I want to also go back and ask about your content development experience. And this is something what I've experienced scenarios where content can feel more like a production house where the marketers do not see the impact of the content. They just go churning stuff out. How do we demonstrate that content creation is a growth engine for marketing?
I think marketing also has a responsibility to change that perception. If you allow yourself to be treated like a production house, I think you're asking for it. So I think as marketeers, we should learn how to say no. We should learn how to push back on the business, the pesky product people, and show us some respect. Push back by asking them questions first and foremost about why is the content even needed? What is it trying to solve? What kind of problem is it trying to address? I think being confident, taking a step back, and then asking them the objectives they're trying to achieve, the outcomes they want to see. And then from there, advise them whether this is even the right format, this is even the right content, or do you even need this content in the first place? Or is there existing ones that you can already use and just maybe enhance it? That's one part of it, the most how you work with business part of it. I think the other part of it in terms of practicality, functional, operational is also something to think about, right? Because now, to be honest, with Gen AI, content production or like adaptation has become very, very scalable and very easy. So if marketing people are still stuck in that mindset of just my sole responsibility, that's all I want to do every day. I take instructions, I just churn out X amount of content, this format, that format, my job is done, I'm happy, everybody's happy, then I think you'll be in big trouble because your job can be replaced.
Oh, yeah.
You
It
need
goes
to be
back to like it
strategic.
evolving, right? That's such a good
Yes,
point.
you need to start
Absolutely.
thinking. Yeah.
Absolutely. I also want to ask you about one of the articles that I read of yours. I had a great theory on performance versus preference. Can you expand on this theory? Because I'd never heard this explained in this way before, and it really got me thinking.
I is more prevalent coming from the finance industry where and the banking industry where tend to be obsessed with acquiring customers, which they always like to call it performance marketing. And then there's the whole other content brand engagement part, which is then they call it preference. So much so that sometimes they keep it as separate teams and then it creates a lot of unnecessary silo and disparate messaging. So what I was actually trying to say here is that as marketeers, we need to be crystal clear to the business as well in explaining and educating them that every marketing, regardless of whether it's so-called performance or preference, it serves the same purpose ultimately for your organization. It will help you to elevate your presence. It will help you to narrate your brand story. It will help you to communicate with your customers. But if you're expecting, for example, conversions immediately, then you cannot expect to say, put up a high level kind of corporate branding message and expect people to buy something immediately because it just doesn't work that way. We all know that at the end of the day, as part of the buying funnel, top to bottom, and the buying journey, it's getting more and more convoluted. It really depends on where they are in terms of their decision making journey. Let's say if I've seen this same ad like multiple times, but at that point of time, I'm just not ready to buy. This is not what I need. I don't just need another loan product, right? It's a needs based thing. So, but then if I happen to have that need and I see your ad, and even though it's something like very high level, then I might be curious. I will want to find out more. But then I still won't buy because I want to check if you have any incentives for me, right? And then the next thing I see, oh, okay, now I'm going to get like Grab vouchers or something. Then, okay, I'll convert immediately. But then the interactions have been full cycle in a way, right? Because I've seen this before, I've seen that, and that has all ladder up to my eventual buying decision. But then the performance marketers will say, hey, I win. I'm the most because they click on my ads convert. But that is what it's meant to do. Whereas the preference doesn't mean that they didn't do anything, right? It doesn't mean that they just put out ads and wasted a bunch of money. They helped contributed to the whole buying decision. So I think that's the understanding that I want people to get in terms of what they do.
No, that's really well articulated. I wanted to ask you about account-based marketing. How do I know if account-based marketing is the best option for my audience, and where do I start?
Even before looking at account-based marketing, I think you need to look at your sales structure. You need to look at whether you guys even have your app together in the first place. For example, I've worked with companies before where they think that the concept of account-based marketing is just purely email. I want to send a bunch of nice emails. That was account-based marketing, but it's not. They don't even know that who are their top list of accounts they want to target and why. Like, why are these revenue generating for them versus non-revenue generating? They don't even have the right relationships sitting within the accounts that they thought that they want to target. Right relationships meaning you need to know different levels. You need to know not just the C level. You need to know who is actually an influencer versus the decision maker, because both can be different. And then you also need to know who is the operational one that actually will help you to get close to the, for example, the influencer or the decision maker. Because very many a times it's very hard to go directly to the top level unless you are familiar with them. But if you are already that familiar with them, you're probably already doing some sort of account-based marketing, to be honest. So that I think before that, I think there's almost like a checklist that you need to follow. Ask whether you have the right relationship. Ask what kind of accounts that you have. How well do you know this account in terms of their pain points, their challenges? What solutions are you selling currently versus your competitors? Why are they buying from them? What is your competitive edge then? If you are confident that you have a better offering as compared to your competitor, then why is it that they are not convinced? Is there some other political things going on that you will never have control over? Sometimes it's as simple as that, that even though as much as you try to get connected with them, it's just not possible. So then for such things, then you need to decide whether that account is still worth pursuing or you put it on the back burner first, wait for whoever is that person to leave in your competitor's organization or your client's organization. And then you can go in for the queue.
That's awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot more thinking behind it.
No, that's really good though. It's not, I like okay, your point around it's not just an email campaign. Yep. That's a really good point to start with. I want to shift and start talking about leadership. For someone who wants to become better leader, what is your recommendation for how to improve this?
I think it needs to be learned along the way. Although I know that empathy, compassion, to me, these are very important traits to have to start, but not everybody has that, fortunately or unfortunately. So if you need to be self-aware whether you have empathy or not. But if you are not, then try to at least maybe just imagine yourself being in their shoes, or imagine that it is your family or your close friends whom you're dealing with or you're managing. But first and foremost, you need to have that in order to be able to connect with them beyond just a head count. For example, in your very big team, right? You can't treat them as just one head count. You cannot just keep layering people and then I'm good. Like, I only need to deal with the first layer, the bottom layers. They're good because they have their own managers to deal with it. So I think a good leader truly know and can connect with their people, even though no matter how high they go, they will still make an effort to listen to them. They will still make an effort to have skip level sessions. I've had a few good leaders who have done that, and I think it's important because ultimately they are just like you and me, right? We are all human. So they all have their challenges and they all need guidance and some sort of mentorship. So you should never be too busy for people. I think that's the moral of the story.
That's thoughtful, very thoughtful. Should marketing have a voice at the table at the leadership level of a business?
Absolutely. I know I've been reading these horrendous articles about how some of the global MNCs are doing away with CMO. It's like it's a downright nightmare, I think. And then you see so many organizations, they have the C-suite, but you don't see a CMO, right? And then you see, oh,
Right.
at the bottom is the head of marketing. It's what? Is that a joke? So I think marketing has to be front and center. Marketing is part of the strategy. Essentially, it's very telling if you don't have a CMO because it essentially means that ultimately you still don't treat marketing as your partner. You still treat them as your employee or something that just executes your so-called big strategy. But the truth is, your CMO should have enough years of experience to bring to the table, not just the voice of customers, but in terms of your brand story, how you should be narrating it, how then it ultimately serve your sales objectives, because it all ladders up. So I think they need to remember that marketing is full funnel. And the full funnel means that having that holistic perspective and strategy that sits across even customer experience, all your technology, finance, your sales objectives, and so on. So I think equally important is some marketing should increasingly co-own some of sales target of the business so that it really puts them at the table.
Oh, that's great. This is my final question. It's a doozy. What is your favorite failure, and would you be comfortable sharing this with us?
Yes, totally. I love failing. I Looking back, I think when I first started in my career, I was with a public agency. So I had that mindset, right? Because being young and bright eyed and everything, you're like, okay, as long as I achieve this, should be promoted, right? It shouldn't be rocket science. That was like my logical mind try to justify my own promotion. But then in the end, of course, I didn't get it. I was quite unhappy. Of course, I didn't feel like, did I fail? What did I do wrong? And how can I even recover from this? I'm so embarrassed because I was even like proudly telling my parents, hey, I think I'm going to get promoted at the end of the year. So they promoted my peer who has been with the organization for longer than me. So then I started to think, what does that mean that I need to stay on for a long time in order to get promoted? Like, where's the justice in this? So in the end, I left in a way because I couldn't get over that kind of mental struggle that I had. But then looking back, as I progress, as I move on to different organizations and learn how culture works and everything, then I realized maybe I just was not ready because you need to achieve more than just checking off whatever milestones from a business perspective. You also need to learn to manage people, right? You need the people skill, which I felt was definitely lacking at that point because I was not experienced. So you need more than that to get promoted. So I think on hindsight, I don't regret leaving because in a way I move on to a different place. I learned more. So I think there is still a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel where I learned that I was not ready. But then at the same time, I learned that I want to do more and I want to progress more. So it doesn't mean that if I get promoted, if I end up doing the same thing, would that be good for me? No, right? Like, don't get a promotion also just for the sake of moving up. If it doesn't help you in your personal development, then there's no point.
That's so true. Jaslyn, yeah, there's a lot of good life lessons in that. Thank you for sharing that. I think so many have had similar circumstances. And in the moment, you're like, oh my goodness. But then in reflection back, you realize it all was it's all part of a bigger path, right? For the
Yeah.
destiny. Thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your experience, your wisdom, marketing. I've got so many more questions, but we'll leave it at that for today. Thank you for joining B2B Marketing Asia podcast and have a great rest of your day.